Cehol sibh a chairde iascre, tá sorgam goil sibh gamma, fáte roiv a east. You're very welcome to another video from Gundog and Fly. And this time around I'm going to be talking about a particular fly and then I'm going to be tying it. Now, the fly I'm going to be tying is known by a variety of names, but I'll get to that in a moment. But just to give you a brief history of how I discovered this fly, I came across it. It's definitely more than 25 years ago, at least anyway, thereabouts. And I began using it and I found it just to be unbelievable, to be honest. There is one little caveat I would tell you about, and that is this fly is so effective from dusk and thereafter that it has there is no real competition as far as I'm concerned. There's any amount of different types of this particular insect that are copied, but this particular fly seems to outdo all the rest. But previous to or just before dusk, it doesn't appear to be very much good. That's my experience, having fished it on quite a lot of rivers, and I've also fished it on lakes. But after dusk, there's nothing to compare. Now, this fly, like I said, is known by various names, and I have a list of them written down here. It was invented by a man by the name of Roman Moser. As far as I'm aware, he's an Austrian, and there's great credit due to him for inventing this fly. The Moser Caddis, I think that's its official name, although if it really has an official name, but it's also known as a bubble sedge or a bubble caddis, a foam sedge, a yellowhead sedge, and known here locally as a Honda 50. Now, how did I get the name the Honda 50? Well, I'll give it to you briefly. I had two fly shops at one point, and my biggest selling fly was this fly without any question, and they got the name the Honda 50 through a guy that used to work for me in the shop. He said the little yellow head on the fly reminded him, you'd have to ask him why, of many years ago in Ireland, people used to come into towns and villages from the countryside on Honda 50s. And it wasn't until the 1970s, I think, that helmet laws were introduced. And apparently the only helmets that were available at the time were yellow. So everyone was wearing a yellow helmet coming into town on their Honda 50, and hence the name. So it's known locally here as the Honda 50, and that name has spread quite a lot around Ireland, so we can sort of lay claim to that name. But anyway, going back to the fly itself and its efficacy, how effective it is, there are loads of different types of sedges. At least, to my knowledge, at least 30 different types of sedges that have been developed over many years, and they all work to a degree, and I've fished with all of them down through the years, but I never ever fish with any sedge, only this now. And it's so effective that when I'm coaching beginners, what I try to do just to get them to get the feel of a fish on the line is I'll bring them and stand them at the top of a run of water, assuming that they can't even cast. They're complete beginners, and just get them to throw the fly out. Inevitably they'll catch a trout. The fly is that effective that you don't really have to be very good at presentation or anything like that in order to get the results. But I fish this fly in a particular way that gets the best out of it, I consider. And I'll make a video about that possibly down the road. Now, there are difficulties involved in filming at that hour of the evening because of the failing light. The camera that I use, which is a GoPro, tends to struggle at that time of the evening, but I'll make an effort at some point to try and show you and demonstrate to you the way that I fish it, and it's just unbelievable. Anyway, the tying of it, it's not really a difficult fly to tie. A couple of small little bits if you're a complete beginner that might present some difficulty, but nothing that can't be overcome. So let's get to it and tie the Moser Sedge / Honda 50. Okay, here we go. Now, the hooks I'm going to tie this fly on are these. These are Mustad, and they're size 14. They're a dry fly hook. You don't necessarily have to use a Mustad, just a good quality dry fly hook, and I find size 14 to be the best all-round size. So now the thread I'm using here is uni thread in black, and that's 8/0. So I'm going to start off with just a bit of mind on body down as far as opposite the barb. Now the barbs on these are very small on these mustad hooks. In fact, I squeeze them afterwards. So you can also use a barbless hook if you prefer. Now, next thing is foam. Now, the traditional colour for tying this fly was egg yolk yellow, but yellow foam is what I use most of the time. It doesn't seem to matter to the trout if you use orange or, in this case, red or green. It just, I think it's the overall shape of the fly, but the yellow foam was the one that it was tied with originally, so I'll keep it the original. So I cut the foam, I suppose what that's 5 or 6 millimeters wide, 1/8 of an inch I think, and hold it down on top of the hook, bring the thread over the foam, but don't tighten on it, because if you tighten on it at this point you'll actually cut it. So all I'm doing is I'm putting on a few relatively loose turns just to hold it in place like that. And now on this part here I'm going to move back along and incrementally tighten. You don't want to tighten right in where you have it tight, where you originally tied in, because you will cut the foam. So now I'm just going to tighten it just here and tighten down like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move for a second because I forgot. Here we are. Now I'm just going to put a little super glue just on that point there, just a tiny drop, and that cements the whole thing into place, because unless you do that, what happens is you get a tendency for the foam to rotate around the hook shank, and that is not much good for your presentation of the fly. So now I'm heading back down to just opposite where the barb would be, and now again, this is a mixture of various different materials just to make an olive dubbing, kind of a loose buggy dubbing. Some people swear by olive, others like yellow, some like a silvery body. I tend to think that it makes not a whole lot of difference. It's just what you have confidence in. Some people bought this fly from me and I had it tied with, say for instance, with the olive dubbing, and they caught trout in it, so they would always then from that point on insist on getting it with the olive dubbing. And then other people bought it with yellow or whatever the case would be, and they also caught fish in it and they would insist on that particular colour dubbing. So I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference what colour you use. So that's it, just a little body of dubbing, and you can put it on relatively loose. It again doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. So the body is kind of a fat little body, if you like, in comparison, we'll say, to an olive or anything like that. Sedges or Caddis have fatter little bodies. So now the next thing, this is deer hair. Now this is grey. Doesn't necessarily have to be grey. Again, I don't believe it makes any blind bit of difference what colour you use. Again, I have to move just one moment. I forgot something. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a little piece of this grey deer hair. Now, experience will teach you, if you don't already know, how much deer hair to use. I kind of describe it as like the circumference or the thickness of a diary pencil. That's how I best describe it. But practice will teach you how much. So this is my little hair stacker, and I'm just going to level the ends of it. Now the length of the wing is approximately just fractionally longer than the hook itself. So I have that measured now. Now to tie it in, you hold it on top like that, pinch it. 2 or 3 loose turns and then tighten down. And there's your wing. Now, another tiny bit of dubbing. Just that much. Hold the wing down. Wind it on. And now we fold back the ether foam and we then tie down, and of course the first couple of turns have to be, don't tighten is the secret, don't tighten down on the first couple of turns, and make each turn of the thread right on top of the others. Now you can start to tighten down a little bit because you're actually compressing down on top of the thread as opposed to the foam. And whip finish. Now I do a double whip finish just for the sake of security. Cut your thread, lift the foam upright, and there we are. That's your Moser Caddis or your Honda 50 or your ether foam Sedge or whatever you want to call it. And simple enough and quick to tie. Still my biggest seller by far. I sell more of this fly than any other. So that's it, folks. That's your Honda 50, Moser Caddis, ether foam Sedge, and whatever other name you'd like to call it. Thanks very much for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have a beginner, somebody who's learning to fly fish and who's never caught a fish before and they're struggling, this is the boy that will get them hooked. So be sure always to have some of these in your fly box, particularly after dusk. Even if you're not a very proficient angler, or you're just learning, or you're progressing in the sport and not having a lot of success, fish this after dusk and I will guarantee you that you will catch fish. No question whatsoever. I will stand over that every which way. So, Sinna Will, enough, that's it today. Goramila Mahagui as for Coloda Rish. Thank you again for your company, and Godiga Casper Erachele Rish Moit. Until we meet again, Slán go fóill.